Great documentary films can teach people about the world, but the strength of the medium is that it doesn't just explain facts, it can also reveal emotional truths. One recent documentary film that does this is called The Librarians. It takes a look at book bans in U.S. public schools and shows how librarians have reacted to them. In 2021 in Texas, for example, State Representative Matt Krause made a list of 850 books. He wanted to know if Texas schools had them. Shortly thereafter, Governor Greg Abbott started sending letters to education officials about removing the books he considered inappropriate.
I remember seeing Governor Abbott's letter, and my district was mentioned specifically. That was the first moment that I realized school librarians could be criminalized for selecting books and making them available on the shelf.
These efforts aren't limited to conservative states like Texas. They are happening around the country. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking with people behind two documentary films that help us better understand complex issues facing the United States. Later, we'll learn about the film Missing in Brooks County. It explores what happens when people go missing after crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. But up first, Kim A. Snyder is an Oscar-nominated film director and producer. Her documentary Newtown won a Peabody Award. Her new film is The Librarians. Martha Hickson is a retired New Jersey librarian. She's featured in the film The Librarians as one of those fighting to prevent books from being banned. In 2022, Martha earned the Lemony Snicket Prize for Noble Librarians Faced with Adversity. Welcome both of you to Disrupted.
Thank you.
I'm curious about what libraries mean to both of you. Our listeners know that I am an unapologetic nerd who really found my way through the power of libraries, especially having an aunt who was a librarian for so many years. I see them as special places. Kim, let's start with you. Why this focus on libraries and librarians?
It came to me sort of later as an epiphany about my own emotional attachment to libraries. And that came about when I started to understand, as Martha and I and some of the others traveled, the nerve that this is and continues to hit around the country. And what came to me was these early memories of my mother dropping me off in the public library in Princeton, New Jersey. And sometimes I would get lucky enough and I actually would go to the Princeton Library, Princeton University, the big library. And just the sense of awe and associating it, reflecting back on maybe my first memories of true freedom and agency, of a place that there were no limits. There were lots of limits on many things in my house, like candy and TV, but no limits when I went into that library of what I could access and the worlds I could explore of who I wanted to be. For me, libraries represented freedom and a sense of agency, and maybe without knowing it, a glimpse into who I would be and what my life would become.
Martha, what Kim is saying resonates deeply with me because I've always believed that librarians help curate freedom and curiosity and exploration for so many people, not just young people, but anyone who is able to have contact with that space. You dedicated your career to being a librarian. What is it that makes libraries special for you?
I think what makes libraries special to me is that they're community gathering places. And one of the great things about libraries as community spaces is they're welcoming spaces. They're for everyone. Not every kid that's in high school is going to get on the football team. Not every kid is going to be the head cheerleader, but every kid can come to the library and be welcome and have their whole identity welcome. They don't have to hide themselves. There is something on the shelf for every part of you in a library.
Kim, you have made films that touch a number of issues that deeply resonate with people, that there is a sense of place and presence and connection to that. What led you to make this film about librarians and this sort of recent wave of book bans?
Well, my projects sometimes find me and are often instinctual, and that was true of this. They always start with a story and characters. And I was initially attracted to, not in a positive way, but attracted to the news of this Krauss list in Texas that had 850 books. I didn't know a lot about that. And I was taken with the list and what was on the list, which was mostly targeting LGBTQ plus titles, authors of color, books about race. And so I then learned about a group of librarians in Texas that were reacting to this and organizing. And that's where the string started to be, pulled out and began to unravel. And I soon understood that this went well beyond Texas, that this was something that was well organized and not an organic happening, and escalated in that fall of 21 for many reasons that coincided. So that began a 4-year journey of tracking a number of librarians, including Martha, that spanned the country, and how they were reacting, organizing, connecting dots, and ultimately taking some power back.
Martha, I think about your work as a librarian, but also where you were doing that work. People often erroneously assume that these bans, these attacks only happen in Southern places, or that they only happen in places that have a particular ideological perspective or reputation. You are based in New Jersey when you were navigating this. Tell us about how you came into this work.
The events that led to my participation in Kim's film started on September 28th, 2021, and that is a date that is a line of demarcation in my life. My life has never been the same since, will never be the same since. And on that day, a group of parents in Annandale, New Jersey, that's where my school was. I was teaching at North Hunterdon High School. At that time, I had been there for, I guess, 17 years. And this group of parents showed up at a Board of Education meeting to complain about books and to complain about the fact that the library celebrated Banned Books Week, which we had done for every year for the prior 16 years. And in addition to that, they wanted to complain about the librarian, that being me. And in the course of their rant, they labeled me by name a pornographer, pedophile, and groomer of children. I happen to have been watching that live via live stream because earlier that day, my principal said that he had heard a rumor that there might be a complaint about a book at that night's board meeting. Well, I had no idea the extent to which that complaint would grow. In the end, in the ensuing days, that group of parents challenged, that means tried to have removed from the library 5 books in total, all with LGBTQ plus themes. They were Genderqueer, Lawn Boy, This Book is Gay, Fun Home, and All Boys Aren't Blue. They labeled each one pornographic. And as local news outlets started to cover this, all hell broke loose in terms of my getting hate mail at work, the vandalism occurring in the library, my colleagues shunning me, my car was vandalized, and the people who started all of this even tried to have me arrested twice. Um, there's nothing really that prepares you for that kind of animosity in your community and in your workplace. However, librarians, through our training, which by the way happens at the master's degree level, we don't just sit around and read and eat bonbons all day. We actually, work actively to build and manage diverse collections that meet the needs of our patron populations. And through our training to do that work, we learn about the First Amendment, we learn about privacy, we learn about the right to read and our responsibility to protect that right against censorship. So I relied on my training for knowing, well, what's the proper course of action here? And that's what I did. I reached out to organizations that do this work all the time, like the American Library Association Office for Intellectual Freedom, another wonderful organization called Every Library, which is a political action committee for libraries, PEN America, the National Coalition Against Censorship, and the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund were all on speed dial that night. As I was watching this play out on the live stream, I was actually contacting those organizations in real time to say I'm going to need help.
I want us to sit with a moment for what you have just shared. Because even as someone who has seen the film, we hosted a screening of the film on the college campus where I work. I had heard about it. I knew about it. I knew about some of these attacks. To hear you say what it meant in that moment to be watching this and have people make these claims against you and to use terms and phrases, the ones that you just shared were disturbing enough, but some of the others were even more disturbing that we couldn't even say on air. My question would be to you, given those attacks and the seriousness of that, what inspired you to continue doing the work, to continue speaking out and advocating for the science of what librarians do every day? That, as you said, is not just showing up and say, I like to read, but really thinking about the training. What inspired you to keep going?
The answer to that is very simple, and it's one word: students. I got into this work, specifically school librarianship, and specifically school librarianship with high school kids, because I wanted that energy in my life. I wanted to work with young people, and it's made a tremendous difference in my life. I don't have kids of my own. The students I worked with for 20 years, poured all that energy into me. I loved every minute of it. And I really respected them as people, as full human beings. And, when they started naming these particular books, I work the circulation desk in my own library. Every one of those books that was on the shelf, I acquired for the collection. And as those titles came up, I could see in my mind's eye the faces of the students who had checked those books out, the faces of the students who had conversations with me about books, telling me books they liked, telling me books they didn't like, telling me books they wanted. And I thought, there's no way I am going to let these people, who I knew immediately had no seriousness when it came to the books themselves. They hadn't read the books. They would never read the books. They were using the books as a proxy, as a tool for political action. And they had no idea what they were doing in terms of the meaning to the kids. And I was not going to let those people and their ignorance harm those students.
Kim, this is a film that took me through a range of emotions. There's anger as I listen to Martha recount what she endured, all in service to affirming young people. There was a sadness as I watched this film. It took me through the range of emotions in a way that I did not expect to experience. And one of the most emotional sections for me was this interaction between a mother and adult son from Texas who are on opposite sides of the debate. Share a bit of that with our listeners and what it was like for you to tell that story.
We had come to know in that epicenter town, if you will, our origin story of Granbury, Texas, a conservative place, a wonderful, sassy hair salon owner named Adrian Quinn Martin. And Adrian sort of ingratiated us to the town, and there was this zealot, book banner, Monica, who was a sort of fixture, later ran for school board, actually. And we had no idea that she had an estranged son that she had cast out of her home with 9 children 5 years prior, 4 or 5 years prior for coming out. And so there was an altercation that happened between Adrian and Monica after one of the school board meetings, where Adrian challenged her because it was known that Monica had actually filed charges, criminal charges, against the librarian. And that altercation ended up on social media. Her estranged son in San Diego saw it. He then posted, and he ended up returning to Granbury organically to basically confront his mother and make a plea to the town. So that's the first time they had seen each other in years. And it is quite a dramatic scene and heart-wrenching when we also learned that neither he nor his 8 siblings had ever stepped foot in a public school, and that he had never had access to the kind of books that Martha is talking about. He probably would have been one of her kids had he been in New Jersey. That is a real, I think, important core character development in the movie of representing, along with Audrey, our anonymous library in the beginning, who talks about kids feeling like they understand that taking those books is like putting them on a shelf back there in the dark. And I often think about where these books are, these sort of fugitive books that are just taken against protocol and sit in warehouses, and in some cases have been trashed and violated in a sense, that horrible saying that predated Hitler many decades before, that when they burn books, they burn people. They later burn people. So I don't think that is lost on a lot of the students that Martha's talking about. That if they don't want the books that represent us, they don't want the books, they don't want us.
As I watched this film, it made it even clearer that it's never really about the books. It's always about fear. It's always about ignorance. It's always a way of creating a boundary that says who matters, who does not, and do I have the power to make you feel that you don't matter even more? My question for both of you is, how do the people in the communities that you cover, that you're a part of, what does recovery and repair look like in those spaces for either of you who'd like to answer?
In my case, recovery and repair really involved community itself. I reached out to folks that I knew to be friendly to the library. There were certain parents who would, anytime they were in the building, would stop in to say hello just because they love libraries. And those were the people I reached out to start building a coalition that eventually grew to about 400 people to gain support for the right to read. I happen to have retired in November of 2024. And although there are a lot of things I'm proud of about how I handled this situation, one of the things I'm proudest of is the fact that the group that came together to support me and the students, they are still working together in the community to get rid of this extremist thinking. We hear a lot about parents' rights in this fight. And when the parents' rights crowd is talking about parents' rights, they're talking only about a tiny sliver of parents themselves, not recognizing that every parent in that school community has a right to decide what their child reads. And by insisting that books be removed from the library, they're stripping away rights from every other parent. So when all those other parents stand up as a community to say no, it's effective. And that's what we did.
Kim, go ahead, because you've seen elements of these stories in so many communities, not just around book bans, but the trauma of gun violence and the kind of extreme disruption. What does it look like from your perspective?
So there's an awareness, there's an anger like you're expressing, and then there's a real desire to do something about it. And we have seen that the repair and recovery looks like hyper local organizing. And we're really proud that this impact campaign that will continue through the fall in a very critical year implores people to become hyper locally involved in down ballot voting, particularly in school boards, city council, where these things are determined, where the kinds of policies that might have protected Martha from principal up to school board really matter. And urging people to think, if they're inspired, that they can run for these. Sometimes they're unopposed because there are three extremists sitting in that position to say, we don't need these experts. We're just going to get the local pastor to decide with a couple of those parents what our kids should be reading.
Martha, as we come to the close of our conversation, I want to ask you, what do you say to people as an action step who say, this is ridiculous, this is horrible, I want to be a part of not just protecting libraries and librarians, but of affirming the power that we have to make choices and to be curious about what we choose to be curious about? What do you say to people who want to know, what can I do?
Well, there are several things that they can do. And the easiest thing that anyone can do right now, even while I'm speaking, is to join uniteagainstbookbans.org. I'm going to say that again, uniteagainstbookbans.org. And that is a coalition of many of the organizations that I mentioned earlier, experts in this space. And what they have done is put together a fantastic set of resources that are at that URL And they even have it organized by time frame. If you have 5 minutes, here's something you can do. If you have 15, if you have 30. So there are all those tools there for you. But more importantly, once you sign up and become part of their database, when a librarian like me reaches out for help, they can activate you to say, hey, Martha in your community needs help. And here's the next board meeting where she's going to need someone to speak up for her. So you would then automatically become part of that ecosystem to help us out. And then with regard to the health of libraries as a whole, use your library. If you don't have a library card, go get one. If you have a library card, use it. There's so many wonderful things going on at your library, and it's beyond just books, although books are wonderful. And then finally, when you're at that library, or if you're more of a digital person, you want to send a note, an email, let your library and your librarians know that you appreciate them.
First of all, I would love them to tell others about this film. It is available now on PBS's Passport, their app, but it will soon be available more ubiquitously on demand screenings. But I would love people to visit thelibrariansfilm.com because we have a lot that we are putting together as an impact campaign leading into the Banned Book Week in October and into our electoral cycle that has to do with school boards and local civic engagement.
So use your library, show appreciation, spread word about this film, and join others who are committed to these acts of freedom.
Can I add one more?
Of course. Go ahead.
Vote. Please vote. Vote.
Vote, especially in local elections. Kim A. Snyder is an Oscar-nominated film director and producer. Her new film, The Librarians, takes a look at recent fights over book bans in school libraries. And Martha Hickson is a retired high school librarian. She's featured in the film The Librarians and received the Lemony Snicket Prize for Noble Librarians Faced with Adversity. Thank you both for joining us on Disrupted and for the amazing work that you do every day.
Thank you for this conversation.
Thanks for your interest.
Coming up, we'll hear from filmmakers who worked on a documentary about people who go missing when they cross the border between Mexico and the United States.
Migrants started dying, and the U.S. government knew that this was happening, but they thought the deaths would prevent more people from coming.
This is Disrupted. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking about documentary films that help us understand our world. One of those films is Missing in Brooks County. It's about a county in Texas where people go missing after they cross the U.S.-Mexico border.
Sheriff's Office, let me help you.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm actually trying to have some information regarding a family member who is missing.
There's been a lot of missing people.
Jeff Bemis and Lisa Malamat are co-directors and producers of the film. Jeff and Lisa, welcome to Disrupted.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
How did you become interested in the subject of this film?
So Lisa and I heard a radio documentary about a forensic scientist at Baylor University named Lori Baker. And we were really moved by the documentary. Lisa and I met each other at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, and we wanted to work on something together. So we reached out to Lori. She invited us to come out. She took us down to this place called Falfurrias, Texas, that we'd never heard of. And we said, okay, where's the border? She said, no, that's 80 miles away. This isn't even a border county, but this is where the problem is. And what Lisa and I saw happening in Brooks County was so shocking that I think pretty quickly we realized this was the story. And then it became a 4-year endeavor to try to document what was happening in Brooks County.
Lisa, tell us more about what you saw or experienced in that initial visit that was so shocking, but also compelling to say, this is the story that we need to tell and the way that we need to approach this very complex story. What did you witness while you were there?
Well, I had recently moved to Tucson, Arizona, which is not far from the U.S.-Mexico border. So I was very familiar with migrant deaths along the border just because of my new home in Arizona, and that's something that's talked about and thought about here a lot. Probably not as much in the Northeast because you're so far from the U.S. Mexico border, but here it is something that is talked about. And so when we went to Brooks County, obviously, like Jeff said, we thought we would be going to the border. And we thought migrant deaths were happening along the border. But no, this was actually happening near this interior checkpoint, which was so far from the border. And it was just really confusing. Like, why was this second line of defense that we had never heard of, this idea of an interior checkpoint? So that was the first thing that we were really surprised about. But obviously, once we learned about all of these families that were missing loved ones and just getting our heads around this concept of what it would be like to have a family member missing, because Jeff and I are both parents. So we began to think of what that would be like if one of our children went missing, just vanished off the face of the earth. And what that would be like to not have that closure for the rest of your life, waking up every day not knowing what happened to your child or sister or brother, whoever the person is. So that was one of the things that really touched us emotionally on that first trip when we were spending time with Lori and she was talking to us about having interactions with family members and some of her stories. So we knew that we really wanted to find at least one family to tell their story in our film. And it took us a while actually to find that family, the right family.
This is an experience that unfortunately is very common and familiar to a number of families who are in Brooks County. And when you think about that concentration of pain, of loss and uncertainty, and then deciding whose story do we tell and how do we sort of honor that, share with us a little about that process.
Well, first of all, Lisa and I are glad that the Roman family, as depicted in the film, they were very active in the search for their loved one, their missing loved one, Omero Roman. They were on the ground, they were asking questions, posting flyers, doing kind of investigations. I'm not sure that's totally typical. A lot of families of the missing are justifiably afraid of any interaction with law enforcement because it could upend their lives. But in this case, the family had, I think, what you would call agency. I mean, they were active protagonists in the film, and they do appreciate the film. They have been very supportive of the film, and they've gone to a lot of screenings and panels. And I think in their case, they were the right family because they felt empowered by having their story told. I think it gave them a platform for their story. It gave them a platform for their grief. But the fact is, it's not for every family. In fact, we did follow a family that in the middle of filming, they said, I think we're not ready. And so we stopped filming with that family.
Immigration is something that most people have an instant reaction to, an instant response to, even if that is often built on misinformation. And one of the things that is discussed in this film that I think is so important in terms of context is this immigration policy of prevention through deterrence. Tell our listeners a little bit about that policy and the impact that you've seen it have for these families, for Brooks County, where you are doing this work.
So this is not a new policy. This is a policy that's been around since the Clinton administration in the early to mid 90s. And the idea is that if the US makes it difficult for migrants to cross, to come into our country, or to stay in the country, in the case of detention centers, then they will stop coming. So in the mid 90s, the normal ports of entry, San Diego, El Paso, all these places where people would normally come through that were safer because they were urban areas, They were closed down, meaning there were checkpoints and Border Patrol agents and more security along the border in these places in order to prevent people from coming. But what happened was the reasons for coming didn't change. People still needed to migrate, whether they were fleeing gang violence, torture, whatever the reasons. So they just were crossing in more remote areas. So, what started to happen in the mid 90s is, people started dying, migrants started dying, and the US government knew that this was happening, but they thought the deaths would prevent more people from coming. But obviously, as I said, people come for very strong reasons. It's a matter of life and death sometimes for people. So, for example, when Trump was elected the first time, the first thing we noticed when we went back to Brooks County to do some more filming after that he was elected, we noticed more Border Patrol agents. Well, that is a form of prevention through deterrence. That's more deterrence. So, people think that having more agents is going to deter people, but actually what it does is it just made the walk around that interior checkpoint longer. So in other words, rather than the guides bringing the migrant groups closer to the interior checkpoint, they started the walk sooner. So it was a longer walk, obviously creating more problems, more deaths, lack of water, being in the heat in the middle of the summer. And one thing that's not explained in the film, but that might be kind of curious for people, why are migrants coming in the summer? It's the hottest time of year. But in fact, that's the time where there's no hunting.
Jeff, I think people have an image of what a quote unquote border looks like. They may have an image in their mind of what crossing a border may be. And I think that one of the real strengths of this film is that you push back against some of that sort of mythologized view of what people have. And from a technique perspective, there are images there that are very disturbing, images of human remains. And while disturbing, are important to remind people it is not this view of just a massive caravan of people who just say, okay, I'm here. It is a torturous trek that does not end at the border, but as your film says, shows the trajectory of what this means for people, for their families, and for their communities. As a filmmaker, how do you think about those kinds of details so that it never felt sensational? It felt important and contextual to telling the full picture of the story.
We had a lot of conversations about, for example, the image of death that's shown very early in the film. And we kind of had some rules that we would never portray a death if the person were identifiable in any way, unless we got permission from the family. And in fact, that individual at the beginning of the film was never identified. But we did decide that it was an important moment because it sets the stakes for the story. And I think it puts the audience on notice that this is very serious and these are the consequences of the trek and the journey. Making this film taught us that having a family member missing is one of the worst things ever because they never die and yet they never come home. There's never that moment of closure where you can at least try to pick up the pieces and move on. And so these families just suffer endlessly and they don't know what happened to their loved ones. And because of the nature of the desert in that area, and by the way, this is not near the border in this particular case. This is, again, Brooks County isn't even a border county. It's 70, 80 miles away. The elements in the wildlife often consume the remains. Mother Nature has an ecosystem where nothing goes to waste. And so in many cases, it's simply impossible for these families to ever get closure.
Coming up, more from Jeff Bemis and Lisa Malamat. They co-directed and produced Missing in Brooks County. They'll discuss the role that documentary film can play in shaping policy.
If a lawmaker goes home for the weekend with a 3,000-page policy paper and then a documentary DVD or whatever, guess which one they're going to look at first?
This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're discussing documentary film. We've been speaking with Lisa Malamat and Jeff Bemis, award-winning filmmakers who co-directed and produced Missing in Brooks County. It's a film about a county in Texas where people go missing after they cross the U.S.-Mexico border. I asked Lisa about finding a balance between sensitivity and asking difficult questions.
I mean, I think one thing that was really present in our minds when we were filming, but definitely when we were editing, was that we wanted to present a full picture of what was happening. And we didn't want to make a divisive film. We didn't want to make an overly political film. What we wanted to make was a film about humans. That was really important to us all the way through, but particularly in the editing, because we were editing during a very, very divisive time in our country, which continues on, but it was really starting to heat up as we were editing. And so that was like very much in our mind, that we didn't want to make this film that was going to create more division, but really like paint a picture of what's happening on the border as a humanitarian crisis. I still continue to have these feelings. Like, for example, last weekend I was in the Northeast for an event, and a few people were asking me what I was working on lately and what films I've worked on, et cetera. And whenever I bring up this film about migrant deaths, people get really quiet and they don't know what to say. And I think they get kind of uncomfortable because it's not something a lot of people have thought about. Yes, as I mentioned, here in Arizona, it is something we talk about and think about. But in most of the country, it is not something that is part of the news or something that's in people's daily thoughts. And this idea, it's so much easier to be like, I am against this or I'm for this, as you said before, like something black and white, I'm, on this side or the other. But this is about human beings. It's not about politics. It's about the fact that our government is allowing people to die for decades. It continues on. And I remember even Donald Trump went to Brooks County once. Remember that, Jeff? And was shocked about what he saw. The president of our country didn't even understand what was happening along the border. A lot of politicians have no idea. They're in Washington, D.C. They are not anywhere near the border. They don't understand. And so when they hear about it, it's really uncomfortable, because it's like acknowledging that our government is killing people and they don't care. And that's really, as someone who's a proud American, what do you do with that information?
While I hear Lisa saying this is not political, it is about power and choice, and the ways that we make choices about whose lives are expendable, but also about how certain people and experiences are rendered invisible. What, Jeff, is the power of film, of documentary filmmaking, to help us have those difficult conversations and confront the things that feel really difficult but are so necessary? What's the power of this platform to be able to do that?
There was a saying when Lisa and I were doing the impact and outreach campaign for this film: nobody cries over a policy paper. So we would take the film, and sometimes at least twice went to Washington, D.C., had some legislative screenings, took some of the participants in the film, Kate Bradley, Eddie Canales, and they would have briefings and meetings with lawmakers. And I do think that the film helped precipitate some of those interactions. So the thing that film can do is it can deliver an emotional experience. And we were told by lawmakers, hey, we like documentary films, because if a lawmaker goes home for the weekend with a 3,000-page policy paper and then a documentary DVD or whatever, guess which one they're going to look at first?
You mentioned one of the main subjects in the film, Eddie Canales, sadly has now passed away. The film ends with him receiving a call about a missing person, another missing person. Lisa, talk to us about the choice of ending the film on that note.
Along the way, when you make a documentary, you show test audiences and people you respect the film to get feedback, to make changes and make things clearer or add things. And I remember getting one response from a Hollywood screenwriter who wanted the film to end on this like happy note where someone takes over the South Texas Human Rights Center. Like in a Hollywood film, that's what would happen. But we didn't want to give people an out at the end of the film. We wanted people to understand this is going to continue on as long as we let it continue on. And this is not a happy film.
Jeff, the documentary came out in 2021. Do you have a sense of what's happening in Brooks County now, or if anything has changed for that community?
Lisa and I get the newsletters from the South Texas Human Rights Center, and a woman by the name of Nora Salinas now runs it. And they're still doing the work that they were doing when Eddie was there. They're still putting water out to try to prevent deaths. They're still working with Kate Spradley and the Forensic Border Coalition of South Texas to identify remains, which includes exhuming anonymously buried remains. In many ways, Brooks County has made some improvements. So they had trouble sharing the DNA database with the FBI. It was problematic, and they could never quite make the matches that they wanted to make for the families of people who were already deceased and buried without DNA evidence. So they came upon another technique, which includes using fingerprints for when that's available, when it's possible. And suddenly they started making a lot of matches. And I think they also made some other improvements in their system. So they're not as overwhelmed with the deaths, and they really have moved in the right direction. And I think they're solving a lot more cases. They're bringing closure to a lot more families. They're continuing to prevent as many deaths as they can, although the count has still been pretty high because we've had some really hot summers. Sadly, what we've heard, though, is that the problem has moved west. First, it moved to the Big Bend area and then out to El Paso. And essentially, they are where Brooks County was in 2010, 2012. They're burying unidentified deceased migrants without taking DNA evidence. In some cases, they're burying them with their IDs on them. It's illegal, but it happens because they're overwhelmed. They don't have the resources to deal with it. And so the problem continues in Texas.
You are both award-winning filmmakers. You have distinguished careers in this arena. And my last question to you is, what making this particular film, Missing in Brooks County, what did it teach you about yourself, either who you are as a person or who you are as a filmmaker? And Jeff, I'll start with you.
I think when you witness the courage that some of the families have, like the Roman family, they have a lot of resilience and courage. That was really inspiring. And you just hope that you're up to telling the story and finding a way to work sensitively and responsibly. The only other thing I could really say, and I feel like this should be included because Eddie is no longer with us, and Lisa and I went to so many panels and Q&As and meetings, not to mention we filmed with him for 4 years. And he would say, and it was an education for me to hear Eddie speak about this because he had been a labor organizer his whole life. That's what he did. And so he was very sensitive and keyed into labor issues. But what he would say about this whole issue of people dying through clandestine crossings is, look at the statistics. The data shows that the labor is needed. And we have these narratives right now that, people are coming into the United States, they're taking jobs away from Americans. Look at the latest job report. There's 7.2 million open jobs, and yet unemployment is relatively low. So you can have that narrative, but it's just simply not true. Eddie would say this: most people like to have affordable labor. And most people like to have affordable goods and services. And so what Eddie said was, we should give people work status, do background checks, keep track of who's coming and going, and let people take that money that they are putting in the smuggler's pocket, which then ends up with the transnational cartels who are making as much money smuggling people as there are drugs. Let them take that money and put it as a bond, post it as a bond, a non-prohibitive bond at the border, come in, get work status, do a background check, and give people labor mobility and economic mobility and let them go back and forth, because it's win-win. You reduce the catch me if you can zone where Border Patrol's chasing these people and they scatter and they get lost and there you have these deaths. You end the suffering of the families, but you're taking the money away from these transnational cartels.
I mean, my answer is more as a filmmaker. Making a documentary is such a challenge in many ways, but one of the biggest challenges is financial. And you begin a project probably without very much money, or maybe you're using the money that you made on your last film. But, you have to raise money from grants and investors, and all of that is really tricky. And you're not guaranteed anything. But the important thing is that you choose a topic that you believe in. And we did. We really believed in this the whole time. And some days, we just felt like, how are we going to finish this film? Like, we need to rob a bank in order to, get this film made and pay the music composer and our editor and et cetera. But we just kept pushing forward despite any rejections from grants, any, difficulties. I'm not even talking about the emotional side of like making a film like this, which is really, really tricky. But, we just kept moving forward. We made the film. And I think, people are moved by the film. So if you haven't seen the film, Missing in Brooks County, you can find it on the internet. You can rent it from Amazon or iTunes or any of those platforms. I think I just learned the importance of just like keep moving forward no matter what, figure out a way to just keep moving forward with my projects and not get too caught up in the lack of funding. Any kind of art, not just documentary filmmaking, writing a book. It can be very difficult at times where you have doubts about it, and you need to just keep moving forward and believe in what you're doing.
Well, we are glad that the two of you kept moving forward, that you believed in what you are doing. And as we really believe on this show, this is why we need to fund the arts, to be able to have these kinds of understandings. Jeff Bemis and Lisa Malamat are award-winning filmmakers. They co-directed and produced Missing in Brooks County, about the search for people who go missing when they cross the border between Mexico and the U.S. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Special thanks to our former intern, V. Zhuang, for producing this episode. This episode was also produced by Kevin Chang Barnum, Erica McIntosh, and Robin Doyon-Aiken. Meg Fitzgerald is our Senior Manager of Projects and Radio Programming. Our interns are Amanda Adams and Katie Service. You can listen to more than 250 episodes of Disrupted in our archive. And you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Thanks for listening.